Boss threatens to fire me. I agree, then expose truth that gets him and his butt is fired. Now I lead my new team. What a twist. Due to numerous requests, I am cross-posting from our malicious compliance. This entire story took place in 2021 and concluded in October. Time truly flies, and it is an account that brings a broad smile to my face. Warning, this is a very lengthy narrative, so grab some popcorn. Background, feel free to skip. In January 2021, I began my employment with a major American corporation, in Europe, operating within the energy sector. At the factory where I started, gas turbine components are evaluated for restoration and reworking so they can be reused. Each individual part costs several thousand when manufactured new and lasts for about a decade or so. The reworking costs only about 1/4 of that and extends the part's lifespan for another 8 to 10 years, accompanied by further inspections for safety. Customers would pay around half to 3/4 of the price of a new part, meaning for each gas turbine, which consists of thousands of components, several million could be saved. Thus, customers benefited significantly, and naturally, the company enjoyed substantial profits. Over the years, this situation resulted in the facility's income being virtually uncontested, with little competition, since the parts were their proprietary design and manufacture. This created a win-win scenario for both the customer and the company. However, this eventually led to a problem where competence, innovation, or even integrity were no longer prioritized by the facility's management. As long as the employees adhered to the established processes and performed their jobs, revenue continued to flow regardless of the actions taken by the office. You can see where this is headed. Setup, somewhat significant. I was employed there as part of the quality control team, specifically tasked with operating a 3-dimensional computer-managed measuring machine. As you can imagine, gas turbines get quite hot and rotate at high speeds. A decade of heat along with dynamic stress has the unfortunate tendency to deform components. To ensure safety, it is essential to measure the parts precisely, so the production team knows which section of each piece requires reworking or if a part is too deformed to be reused at all. Operating this machine isn't overly complicated. You place the piece in a bracket, secure it, load the appropriate model, and initiate the program. You receive the measurement report in text file format, as well as in Excel and PDF formats. The parts, usually rotary blades, typically arrived in sets ranging from 24 to 216, depending on size. After all measurements are completed, you compile all the reports generated by the machine into a single Excel file using a somewhat complex method. It wasn't challenging. I mastered it in a week. This machine was immensely important to the facility, operating 2 to 3 shifts a day, 6 days a week. Approximately 80% of all components processed required measurement at least twice. As anyone with a technical background might surmise, operating a machine and understanding its functionalities are two completely different matters. When I started, only 3 individuals had a thorough understanding of the machine, along with a technician named Vladimir who could actually fix codes or reprogram a 3-dimensional model if necessary. However, Vladimir was the technician for the entire facility, very busy, and his time had to be billed to the department, which the bosses were not overly fond of. Of the 3 individuals knowledgeable about the machine, Antonio is particularly notable. He had been working there for several decades, was familiar with every nook and cranny, and although he was considered a simple worker, he was the go-to person when complications arose. He had a bit of a short temper and a very direct manner of speaking, but his honesty, openness, and fairness were commendable. I, on the other hand, am not the most sociable individual. I tend to be reserved, with a brutal honesty that often comes across too seriously. Generally, I get along with those who share my principles of honesty, fairness, and accountability, but I turn into a bit of an ice block around those who are less trustworthy. I know I'm not perfect, but I have my reasons for not working in retail. Despite some heated exchanges, Antonio and I got along remarkably well. What no one knew was that over the years, Antonio had accumulated such an extensive backlog of days off, overtime, and other benefits that he could retire 2 years early. And he was 63. He had chosen to mentor me as his successor, teaching me every detail about the measuring machine, its maintenance, troubleshooting, and the rationale behind various processes. He was a perfectionist, and so am I, which made me value his guidance greatly. During my first week with the company, I observed a major issue. The facility had a persistent problem with cliques, factions, and small circles of influence. Being part of the right clique allowed one to act without consequences. Conversely, if one wasn't part of it, credit often went to others, and you became a convenient scapegoat. Honestly, I didn't care much about it. I am fairly rigid about following the rules even when others disregard them. For me, this was a well-paying job, despite an awful commute 1 hour and 45 minutes each way. So I aimed to stay for as long as possible, earn my salary, and seek the next opportunity. There was a fourth individual operating the machine, whose name I can't recall, so for reference, let's call him Igor. Igor was affiliated with the same clique as my supervisor, Manuel, my supervisor's supervisor, Freddie, and of course, his own supervisor, Boris, who happened to be his brother. He worked the measuring machine mainly because it was the easiest job for him. He usually worked the night shift, which paid a premium. Occasionally, he would also take the late shift, while I exclusively took the early shift, the least popular due to starting at 6 a.m., but I preferred going home at 3 p.m. Igor was, well, to put it kindly, he was not very bright. He functioned like a damp match thrown into a dark place. I may seem too harsh, but that was my impression of him. He was also quite lazy, rude, and arrogant, especially given his untouchable status due to his brother's close friendship with the head of the entire assessment department. The actual story, I know, long build up. Approximately 6 months after I began working there, the first incident involving the measuring machine occurred. We received materials on pallets, and it was strictly required that the rotary blades be sorted in numerical order. Each part had a serial number and a set number. Sorting them cleanly from 1 to 82, or whatever the total number was, would expedite and simplify the process significantly. Occasionally, an order usually consisting of 2 to 4 pallets would arrive unsorted at the measuring machine, forcing us to sort them. Since we had to remove the blades individually to measure them anyway, it wasn't a significant inconvenience, though it was a bit annoying. Igor would never complete a set if he could avoid it, always leaving 1 or 2 blades unmeasured. Even when he had to finish a set and start a new one, he would never compile the reports into a single Excel file. I'm pretty sure he didn't even know how to do that. One morning, I arrived at work and discovered that, as so often happened, only 3 blades remained to be measured. I shrugged it off and aimed to finish the order and begin the next. However, the pallets were a chaotic mess, completely unsorted despite the measuring process being underway. Igor had worked the late shift the night before and was scheduled to work the late shift that day, which meant I would have the opportunity to see him briefly during our shift handover. Consequently, I was faced with the task of sorting all the pallets while simultaneously operating the machine for the next order to avoid delays, as the machine tended to create bottlenecks in the facility. Typically, this was a laid-back job. The blades never weighed more than 22 kilograms, approximately 48 pounds, and I had about 6 to 14 minutes between measurement cycles to lift them out and swap them with the last measured blade. Sorting the previous order took me about 2 hours of sweaty effort while I managed the machine nearby, which left me feeling somewhat frustrated. When Igor arrived in the afternoon, I politely asked him why he hadn't sorted the one order. He responded quite rudely, claiming he wouldn't do it. I was taken aback and asked if he didn't realize it was mandatory. He simply replied again in a rude tone that he wouldn't discuss it, an outright refusal to address the issue. What on earth? I told him that if he refused to speak about it, I would have to bring it up with my supervisor. He merely smiled smugly and encouraged me to do so. So I did just that. I approached my supervisor regarding the situation, framing it as, "Hey, I thought we were required to sort the materials, or did something change?" This led to a 4-way conversation involving my supervisor, Igor, and Boris. Boris was visibly displeased, and my supervisor appeared rather embarrassed as it was evident that I was in the right, though neither of them wanted to acknowledge their friend's wrongdoing. I maintained my usual ice-cold demeanor, responding with accurate yet succinct replies while remaining polite and professional. The discussion ended inconclusively with a polite request that we sort the pallets when they arrived disorganized. Igor simply shrugged, demonstrating his lack of concern. This would occur 3 more times before Igor somehow evaded doing it entirely. Fine. Strike 1 3 6 weeks later, the second incident occurred. Each morning before my shift, I would perform maintenance on the machine, as Antonio had instructed me, cleaning everything and applying a special lubricant to the stone tread on which the machine's arch ran back and forth. One particular morning, I turned the machine into manual mode, just like every other day, intending to move the arch to the end of the tread for maintenance. A second later, I heard a grinding noise and immediately halted the machine. The arch operated on an air cushion system, similar to a hovercraft, ensuring the bottom of the arch remained slightly above the surface to minimize vibrations. If you hear a grinding noise, that's extremely concerning. I quickly inspected the tread and discovered a deep crater in the stone surface, approximately 2-3 centimeters, 1 inch, deep and wide, making it likely that the air cushion lost pressure, causing the arch to slide against the stone surface of the tread. This examination also revealed scratches along nearly the entire length of the tread, suggesting that the machine had been operating with this crater for a considerable time. I immediately shut down the machine and informed Vladimir and my supervisor about the serious issue. I also took timestamps of the damage just out of my habitual caution. The machine was taken out of service as the arch sustained damage, requiring complete reworking of the stone tread and recalibration of the machine. It remained out of operation for over a month due to the crater. Furthermore, that crater appeared to be an exact match for the bottom corner of one of the blades, as if a blade had been dropped onto the stone tread. And the previous shift before me was drumrolls Igor. Naturally, he denied any wrongdoing and claimed he hadn't noticed scratches or heard any grinding noise during his shift. He attempted to shift the blame onto me, but I had documented the incident just 5 minutes into my shift, with the last blade he had measured still in the machine. Yet again, it was painfully evident who had messed up, but no one reprimanded him. While the machine was being repaired, we were assigned to alternate duties. I joined the pre-assessment team, where pieces received their initial evaluations. I made good friends there, which would prove advantageous later. Strike 2-3. After the machine was repaired a month later, we faced a significant backlog, with the other departments struggling to find tasks that didn't require measurements. The machine was supposed to operate in 3 shifts, but Antonio had departed for his 2-year vacation when the machine was put out for repairs, and the other 2 colleagues knowledgeable about running and maintaining the machine had left for better opportunities. This left only Igor and me in that situation, with me working significant overtime for good pay, disregarding all the nonsense. My hourly wage was quite fair. One morning, I noticed something peculiar. The order I had started the previous afternoon remained incomplete, again with just 2 blades left unmeasured. Every measurement report has a timestamp, which I promptly checked. The measurement cycle typically lasts about 3 minutes, plus 1 minute for exchanging one blade for the next. For an unknown reason, the measurement reports from Igor's shift showed large gaps of 10-15 minutes, some even half an hour. Igor was still present since he had worked the night shift. While I was aware of his tendency to slack, these gaps seemed extreme, leading me to initially wonder whether there was an issue with the machine. I asked him whether he had experienced any machine problems during the night, and he snapped at me, saying everything had functioned properly. I asked again if he was certain, and he wanted to know why I was asking. I explained that there were significant gaps in the measurement reports, and I couldn't find any error messages or logs indicating sudden stoppages. Igor glanced at the timestamps, back at me, then simply shrugged and left for the day. That might have concluded the matter, but the following shift, Monday, turned out to be even stranger. Not having worked that Saturday meant Igor had handled 3 consecutive shifts since my last clocking out. I arrived, performed maintenance as usual, and wanted to check progress. 4 orders had been processed since I last worked, so I presumed I would need to compile the reports as usual. However, there were none. I was genuinely puzzled, searching for order numbers and examining the machine's log. The measuring machine had operated over the weekend with no recorded shutdown or restart, yet there were no measurement reports at all. I contacted Vladimir, as missing reports for 4 orders constituted a significant issue. According to regulations, I also notified my supervisor that the machine had experienced a technical malfunction. Both Vladimir and my supervisor joined me in the measuring room as we 3 investigated the issue. It took a while, but we finally deduced the unexpected truth. Someone had turned off the machine's output, perhaps to avoid the timestamps. This caused quite a stir since all 4 orders required remeasurement with reports, leading to production struggling mightily to find work. Again, it was evident who was responsible. And finally, Freddy had enough, though not of Igor. The malicious compliance, finally, that afternoon, Freddy, the head of the entire assessment department, entered my measuring room dressed in an expensive suit, tie, and polished shoes, and stood directly in front of me. I was seated, compiling the results of the remeasured first order, when he blocked my way to stand. He looked down at me and barked that he was fed up with my bullying of my co-workers. He handed me a letter, which contained the termination papers for my contract, signed by him, naturally. He informed me that I now had exactly 2 options. I could either pledge to improve, apologize to my colleague Igor, and admit I was at fault, or I would be dismissed immediately. The silver lining of enduring bullying and terrorization throughout my childhood is that I learned to maintain composure under pressure. So I suppressed my initial urge to argue with him or inform him that his actions were illegal. Instead, I accepted the letter and read through it thoughtfully before nodding several times. Given my cool, professional demeanor, I was known for being silent often, so he interpreted my nods as agreement. He informed me that he expected my written apology by 2 p.m., all the bosses typically left by 2 p.m., arriving around 8 or 9. Upon his departure, bearing a smug grin, he left me with the termination letter bearing his signature. Interesting fact, when both parties consent to it, a contract can be canceled immediately without any further obligations, aside from compensation for hours already worked, which goes through human resources based on electronic timestamps of our clock-ins. I had 2 hours until his deadline, which I used to meticulously clean my workspace, create a backup of my work laptop, per regulations, and also in compliance with organizational policies, completely wipe the hard drive clean. The backup was uploaded to the designated server with all files accurately named and organized. Naturally, the server used for backup data was designated as unsearchable to prevent cluttering the search list, given that identical parts frequently arrived with the same material numbers. If you were informed and knew exactly where to look, you could find the data in 20 seconds. If not, good luck, as it amounted to approximately 10 terabytes of data. I made a copy of the termination letter, now signed by me as well, and emailed it to myself, which was permitted, stowed the original back into the envelope, and gathered my belongings. Then I proceeded to the office with the envelope in hand. Upon spotting me, the big boss displayed that familiar, smug smile. However, this quickly shifted to confusion when he noticed my laptop and phone accompanying me. I handed him the letter, nodded politely, and turned to leave. He yelled after me, demanding to know where I was going, still clutching the envelope. "You terminated my contract. According to regulations, I must return all company property I had been issued before leaving, with the exception of safety shoes and glasses. I wish you a pleasant day, Mr. Freddy." I stated this with a composed, calculated tone, trying to mimic the demeanor of a lawyer, fully aware that he detested my professional attitude. Then I approached my supervisor and placed my belongings on his desk. My supervisor appeared utterly bewildered, inquiring about my actions. I briefly informed him that my contract had been terminated and reiterated the policy. My supervisor was indeed arrogant, but not foolish. His eyes widened in realization as it dawned on him that I was the last person with expertise in both maintaining and properly operating the measuring machine. Given the backlog already facing us, the other departments reliant on measurements had begun resorting to short-time work. Initially speechless, he quickly rushed into Freddy's office to examine the termination letter. In the meantime, I changed in the locker room, exited to the gate, and requested the security personnel to conduct a thorough inspection of myself and my backpack. This was also standard procedure for personnel terminated on short notice. Surprisingly, the guards were rather bemused at my request, yet they complied. They conducted a full search and issued me a written confirmation stating that I possessed nothing belonging to the company. My now former supervisor attempted to contact me frequently during my commute home, but I dislike receiving calls while using public transportation, so I muted the phone and proceeded to read my book until reaching home. Now it was 4 p.m., well past his time to leave for the day, so I finally returned his call. He endeavored to persuade me that I needed the job and assured me that everything could be resolved. My response was simply, "I will secure a new job within a week. It will take you at least a month to train a new hire on the machine, assuming you can even find someone." Then I added, "Offer me a solid contract with triple the salary, and I will return. Oh, and I want a written apology from Freddie as well, and I expect to be able to work without any issues." He asserted that my demands were completely unreasonable, and I replied, "So, to clarify, 3 times I identify significant issues, 3 times you attempt to shift blame onto me, and now you go as far as to try to humiliate me by firing me, and you expect me to be reasonable. It seems quite reasonable to me to simply ignore any further communication from you. Take care." With that, I hung up and blocked his number, as well as any other number he might try to use to reach me later. The aftermath. As I previously mentioned, I still had inside connections within the company, so I gained valuable insights into what unfolded. The facility's most crucial bottleneck became more obstructed and eventually choked completely. No one maintained or cleaned the measuring machine any longer, and given its precision nature, it did not respond kindly. Vladimir soon found himself called in repeatedly to address issues, which in turn built a backlog for him in other areas. Tasks that I or Antonio had resolved in a minute now took hours, simply because Vladimir needed time to make his way over, where he could fix the issue in a minute. Other departments soon experienced a complete dry-up of work, and naturally, they did not want to absorb the blame for missed deadlines, prompting the issue to escalate up the chain, with no one willing to take responsibility. It quickly made its way up to the desk of the national CEO of the company, the highest authority this side of the Atlantic Ocean. I learned that through a friend in HR. Eventually, the so-called kill squad arrived, a group dressed in sharp suits, lacking a sense of humor, with cold expressions and a straightforward order to find someone to blame. I even heard there was a prosecutor from the USA among them. About a month later, the company reached out, requesting my presence for an interview. Not a job interview, mind you, but they sought my statement regarding the entire affair. This was not a legal requirement, as they had no means of compelling me to testify since it was an internal investigation, but I willingly complied and even gave my signature to affirm I was telling the truth. I shared the complete story with them, accurately and openly admitting when I lacked knowledge or was merely speculating. They expressed their gratitude and offered an apology, which I found sincere, explaining that they could not compensate me for my time due to legal restrictions. I was perfectly fine with that and returned home. Igor was dismissed for careless negligence, while his brother Boris received an immediate dismissal as well. My supervisor faced the fallout too. He and Boris were terminated for mismanagement. However, Freddie did not only lose his job, but was also taken to court. I have no idea how that unfolded for him, as he was taken to the US. But given how ridiculous the legal system can be, combined with being designated as the scapegoat by one of the largest companies globally, I wouldn't be shocked if he had to endure a rough time for a while. The entire facility ended the year deeply in the red due to the substantial number of contracts missing their deadlines, resulting in daily fines amounting to tens of thousands for each contract. My connections within the company soon sought new jobs, even for those who had been there for 2 decades. Ultimately, I discovered that the company had to hire the manufacturer of the measuring machine to train new employees on how to operate it correctly. I had mentioned wanting triple my salary. Well, those individuals ended up seeking triple the zeros at the end. Oh, and I landed a new job within 1 day. I was fired on a Monday, interviewed on Tuesday, and completed a trial workday on Thursday. At the end of that day, I was asked when I could start, which was the following Monday. I now work in an incoming quality control department performing manual measurements. My boss is phenomenal, the team is friendly, and my commute is only 18 minutes on an electric scooter. I have been there for 9 months, and am already considered the de facto team leader for first samples, and best of all, I am valued for the work I contribute. I hope you enjoyed this long account. Story 2. Aita for refusing to visit my parents until they accept my boyfriend. I, 21 male, moved out at 18 for employment and college. My family consistently praised how self-sufficient and happy I became. 2 years ago, I began dating a high school friend. We are both men, and a year later, he moved in with me. I concealed our relationship because my family comes from a small, conservative town and holds outdated beliefs. My father thinks LGBT plus individuals only do it for attention. Last weekend, I finally told them. I began by explaining that I am aromantic and asexual, which is the reason I never introduced anyone before. They stated they did not want me to be lonely and should give more people a chance. Then I disclosed that I have had a boyfriend for the past 2 years. The irony, the kind of relationship they always described as ideal for me, is precisely the one I have. Their response was dreadful. My father prayed at the table and fell silent. My mother cried in her room, saying I destroyed her dream of grandchildren, even though I informed them years ago that I do not want children. When I arrived home, she sent a text, "Your father is very upset and will not accept this. Please give us time. You are always welcome at home, but my boyfriend coming wouldn't be appropriate. I love you, even if it's not what I anticipated, and I just ask you to respect us as well." I simply replied, "Okay, I understand, but I am unsure if I do. I feel as though my happiness is something they need to process. Now, I am contemplating not visiting them or allowing them in my home until they accept my boyfriend. This seems reasonable. If my relationship is not accepted in their house, then they should not be welcome in mine until they acknowledge it. However, part of me feels guilty, as though I might be asking too much from individuals with such a narrow perspective. The immediate concern is that tomorrow they are delivering a refrigerator, a gift from last year, while my boyfriend and I are at work. I have attempted to hire a delivery service before, but it is challenging to carry a refrigerator up 3 flights of stairs. I suspect they will wait for us to return home, and I do not want to see them. After everything, I do not want to pretend that things are normal. Am I the antagonist for refusing to see them and limiting contact until they accept my boyfriend? Edit response to comments. I have received many responses in a short time. Thank you to everyone who took the time to reply. I wanted to provide some additional details and context that I omitted in the original post. English is not my first language, so I did not realize that cutting off sounds extreme. That is not my intention. I do not plan to completely exclude them from my life, just to stop visiting them or having them over until they accept my boyfriend. We live 2 hours apart. As I mentioned, my boyfriend was my high school friend, and my father never liked him, even before we started dating. He used to refer to him using the Brazilian equivalent of faggot behind his back, and became angry whenever I mentioned his name. I lost many friendships due to my family's homophobia, but this was the first one I refused to let go of simply because my dad disapproved. The reason I chose to inform them after 2 years is that they kept providing me with positive feedback about my emotional well-being and quality of life. So I thought, if they have been so pleased with my changes since I've been with him, why would they perceive him as a negative influence? One of the most hurtful things my mother said to me privately was, "I never considered having another child, but after what you told me, I reconsidered." That deeply wounded me. I do believe they can change, especially my mother, but I recognize it will be challenging. They have always struggled to grasp even basic aspects of my personality, such as the fact that I am introverted and autistic with sensory sensitivities. Since childhood, they would take me to loud parties, and when I felt overwhelmed or did not enjoy them, they blamed me for not trying to have fun. Even after I received my autism diagnosis as an adult, my father continues to refuse to acknowledge it. Since moving out, I finance my own college, rent, and transportation without any family assistance, aside from occasional gifts that I do not request. Regarding the fridge, it was a Christmas gift they purchased for me, but the Brazilian postal service continually claimed they would deliver it and never did. I even took time off work to be home, only for them to fail to show up. Ultimately, my mother received a refund and purchased another one closer to her residence, 2 hours away. They had already scheduled the delivery before I brought up this issue. I feel like I should accept it so they cannot use it as leverage against me. They have a spare key to my place, which was never an issue before, my mistake in hindsight. I am now considering staying home tomorrow to receive the refrigerator myself and retrieve my key. Once again, thank you for all the insights and perspectives. I truly appreciate it.